Good morning, traders, and a happy Tuesday out there to everyone. Thought y'all had a good evening there last night, and we should have an interesting, day lining up in front of us here today. It's our pre-CPI day, right? Because that'll be due out there tomorrow on Wednesday. As far as our purposes go today, our board is nice and light. I don't really have anything too major there on the economic calendar, aside from Member Bar, is set to speak there at 10 o'clock Eastern, but really outside of that, relatively light and clean cut there on our calendar, so we'll take that into account, but should be normal operations there in our early morning session, 8:30 Eastern, etc. But with that said, we do have our daily chart here on these E-minis to hop right on into. Yesterday, having closed as an inside range bar, hence the blue box kind of zone there. So closed as an inside range bar, traded inside of Friday's range. We did have an instance of testing the daily 5 SMA yesterday, basis the ES. First touch of it was met with a little bit of a fade. We came off of it. That was when we were trading intraday around that point in the early afternoon, and it proceeded to back off and then ended up coming back up one last time and settling in at the upper end of the range. We could see this on the pit session only display. This was the first touch of the daily 5 SMA, and we backed off and then proceeded to still finish off all right, closing at the upper end of the range. So with that said, we have the previous day's high, of course, which we've already done some work around. That comes in at 54.93. So we've been able to trade up to 54.91.75. So just a little shy on the previous day's high test so far. We'll remove this box here just for a second or slide it over, just so we can kind of see the data points a tad better. So we have the previous day's high as well as all the work that we put in from Thursday last week. Right, 54.90 is in that zone there as well. So a whole lot of clustering taking place there on the dailies that we do want to still be aware of. We're not quite on the extended run, meaning the consecutive closes on one side of the 5 SMA. At the moment, we have our set of 3, 4, and 5 closes below, so not quite hitting the threshold for the persistency of trend or extended run yet, but still good to take into account. So that's our daily chart in a little bit of a nutshell there. And where we start to see a tad more detail would be over here on the intraday charts. Again, blue dashed line, nothing too over the top about that. That's just to help represent where that daily 5 SMA comes into sight. So we're doing some work on it at the moment. And just up above, we could see we did leave a pretty big congestion zone, right? We had a lot of trading, a lot of price bar overlap taking place just above the 5500 handle in the ES, so we do have quite a lot of overhead to deal with, and at the moment we're still keeping ourselves beneath the 61 and a quarter, which is bigger picture, the bottom end of our previous range that we had built out. So do like these 120-minute charts to serve us. And we're still sporting the lower lows as of our trading 2 days ago, inside range day yesterday. So as opposed to forming much of a higher low, what we did is just came in up off of the low, filling in some more of the structural work that we had to the downside on the 120-minute display. So plenty of zones to work with. Also along the way, this one should be marked in here as well. Just looking at this previous cycle low that we had, just because it's a little bit of a zone or level along the way that would come into sight before the 61 and a quarter. So I'd say between 92 half, 54, 92 half, and 55.0607 going to be little zones for us that we can work around with their basis, the ES. We'll keep those in mind, see how we develop here off the 8 a.m. reading, etc. But that's pretty much what we're working with there in the ES. And then we have our DAX future here. Similar with respect to forming the inside range bar on the close yesterday. You also have your set of 3, 4, and 5 closes beneath 5 SMA daily. Interestingly, though, DAX having a better job on retracing itself a notch after yesterday's mild advancement that it had. I do like monitoring this 120-minute chart in terms of the 2-day low, looking at 18,282. And while that'll be important, we do want to see how we handle that, right? If we come in and get the full test out of the way there in the DAX. Otherwise, should we fail to make the full test down, we would have a U-turn point to be aware of there in the case of the DAX. That's the 18,520 mark. So we'll keep that in mind, but plenty of room to build out some range there on the 120-minute time frames there for that of our DAX future. Alright, so that's what we're sporting on that side of the equation. Then we have our currency groups, which it's rather curious that the EC, of course, the big point of interest yesterday would have been the 1.10330. That was the bottom of our previous daily chart here. That was from the bottom of the trading that took place on the 3rd of September. So we did test into it. We didn't really get too much farther down below that point. We also have a spike tail from initially up above from our previous month, right? From August that we would be dealing with as well. So we worked on it, kind of regained some footing. It's a very narrow range bar from the overnight after having 2 days of high to low. So here at the EC, even though we tested it, still will be a valid level to see how we trade around. That's the 1.10330. Still to take into account. And in case we have any type of counter-reactive lift here, the oscillator's not super constructive. We did have a slightly lower low on it, so not the standard loss of momentum or divergence on that particular time frame as of yet. But we'll monitor 120-minute moving average coming in at 1.10520 in the case of the EC. Otherwise, down below, if we scroll back the data a tad more, we still do have points of interest that come in lower. Right, this 1.10330. Look to that far left-hand side. I can see we came up through this area fairly quickly, fairly impulsively. So this will kind of be an important region for the EC. Again, CPI tomorrow, so I'm not sure they'll get too far ahead of themselves, but we are in an important testing phase, right? This is like the previous week's low basis, the daily chart. So I do like keeping those in conjunction with each other. A daily chart, that way we can see the bottom of the tail, coupled with like a 120-minute chart. That way we can kind of follow along with this oscillator tone, right? Slightly lower low in the price. So they're going nicely hand in glove with each other there. So as our euro currency basis, that 120-minute display coupled with the daily. And then the gold a tad more in the range bound side of things still, right? Each day we've been kind of updating the visuals here, noting that this kind of reminds us of what we had there in the S&Ps before we had our range expansion breakdown. But this is, as is typical with these range-bound structures, the lower ends and the upper ends of the ranges oftentimes met with extra noise, right? And the degree of follow-through around those points is quite a bit more limited. So in the gold, we did close as an inside range bar yesterday, right? We're not really working with superb range expansion as of yet, right? We're up 3 handles in the in that of the gold. And then on the intraday charts, right, we'll note, we did have pretty good selling pressure 2 days ago, so we did leave some structural work that came back up and dealt with there 2 days back. So gold at the moment, we're doing some holding above the 2533.7, but again, really bigger picture, it'd be more so interesting if we came up to the upper end of the range there in the gold. We really need to see this prove itself. Otherwise, just like how we had lower end of the range yesterday, we made a lower low test. It was kind of short-lived, and we proceeded to bring it right back up into the range and closed at the upper end. So that's more or less what we're sporting here at the moment. In case we get up there, viewing it as not necessarily a very likely scenario, but 25.52 up to 25.53 would be kind of the upper end of this wider range that we've been building out. So if we were to reach up into that zone, we'll be kind of keeping an eye, see if we showcase any signs of loss of momentum or any divergences. Otherwise, keeping up with things continuing to be range bound. So 25.33.70, just a little zone to monitor along the way at the moment. A small spread up above it, but we're not really accelerating back through it. So that's what we're exploring there at the gold. Sometimes nice to scale out the charts a notch as well, right? You can kind of get the feel for our little bit more tightly wound structure, right? The contraction in the length of the swings, etc. So that's where we're coming in on that side of things. And then we have our crude here next in the queue. Crude will go in nicely here with the 120-minute chart. Again, proceeding from the top down. Daily chart first. You have your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 on the close yesterday. That's in reference to the closes beneath the daily 5 SMA. So starting into its extended run to the downside, we do have the box here because we closed yesterday as an inside range bar. So it'll be flagged as, breakout mode in that of the crude. The bottom end of this whole structure, 67.17 is the low that we put in 2 days ago. Right, so we haven't really, made too much progress. But what we can take into account now that we've met the 7 closes on one side is where that 5 SMA daily comes in, right? Because the first close above it would be flagged as like a 5 SMA sale. At the moment, coming in at 68.69 basis the daily chart of the crude. So we'll keep that in mind. That'll be a little bit more pertinent for where we close with respect to that. And then on the intraday charts, really, along the way as well, you got 68.82, kind of close to that 68.68 5 SMA. Just because if we look at it in this manner here, we see that we came down rather impulsively. That's one very large 120-minute impulse bar. So we came in for a retest once, held the higher low, working on it twice, slightly higher low. So in case we do any type of holding again, 5 SMA up above, 68.82, 68.69 to be viewed as like initial hurdles or points of interest there in the crude. Again, that'll be kind of pertinent for the close. Closing beneath it, we'll just add an extra day into the extended run count for that of the crude. Alright, so 120-minute chart though. I like the way it shows these little spike tails that we've been trying to leave there in the crude, but 67.17 is the bottom end of all the structure. So between that and 68.82, plenty of room to roam there with that crude. Alright, and then lastly here we have the bonds. Bonds again, we'll look at the yields in a moment, but in essence, yesterday we gave it another up day. Right? We have our 4 days of green bars. Yesterday we tested down first, but ultimately did end up closing green. So we have a couple back-to-back greens that we've been working with. Similar to the crude, wouldn't be watching or monitoring any further testing of daily 5 SMA. Here in the case of these bonds, we're looking at 125.24 for the purposes. If we blow it out here a notch, we can also see the previous spike tails, more than one, that we're trading around. So this is where the intraday charts can be of a little more value. Right, previous cycle high, 125.23, to serve us as a bit of an over and under. We came up quite nicely, and we've been kind of forming this little, pullback, if we would. However, as we know, this is coming later in the stages of the move. We've had several continuation patterns along the way, so at this moment we have one lower high, no lower lows as of yet. Of course, that remains pending, so I do like using this 125.23 as a bit of an over and under there for the bonds. But as you guys know, I do like following these yield displays as well, and I do think it's still noteworthy that we are trading. We closed yesterday at 3.999%, so that was one tick below the 4% handle. So still like monitoring that zone basis, the yield, and interchangeably, right? Testing of the 5 SMA from up above in the case of the bonds, or down below basis the yield. You're looking at 4.025 basis those 30-year yields in terms of where their daily 5 SMA comes into sight. But either way you slice it, you can go back to the futures and kind of get that same line of visual. 5 SMA down below, 125.23 there to serve us from a previous spike high that we had from the trading there on the 21st. I like those time frames to keep on the sheets there. And with that said, we'll get this dialed on back here. We'll put this back to our normal ES group here. That's back on that 120-minute display. We'll get our daily grouped back up here as well and see what we have lining up here for this morning session that we'll have coming up in front of us.